The second half of the 1960s in the United States marked a cultural tipping point, where the automobile ceased to be merely transportation and became a declaration of identity, ambition, and even rebellion. Post-war prosperity had matured, highways had expanded, and a new generation of buyers wanted more than practicality. They wanted sound, drama, and speed. Advertisements glorified burnouts instead of balance sheets, and stoplights turned into informal drag strips. Out of this uniquely American moment emerged three machines that would come to define the muscle car era: the Chevelle SS, the Ford Mustang Mach 1, and the Dodge Charger RT. Though they differed in size, philosophy, and brand DNA, together they formed a kind of unholy trinity of power, each interpreting the idea of performance in its own distinct way. The Chevelle SS was, at its core, an act of quiet subversion. Chevrolet engineers understood that not every buyer wanted a small, flashy coupe like the Camaro, and not everyone could afford a Corvette. The Chevelle began life as a sensible, mid-size car, something you could plausibly sell to a family man. But once the Super Sport badge entered the picture, especially from 1966 onward, the car took on an entirely different identity. One of the most interesting facts about the Chevelle SS is how understated it could be when ordered cleverly. Buyers could spec a brutally powerful big-block engine, heavy-duty suspension, and 4-speed manual, yet retain relatively modest exterior trim. In an era obsessed with visual aggression, the Chevelle could be a true sleeper, a car that looked ordinary until it annihilated everything next to it. By 1970, the Chevelle SS had reached almost absurd levels of performance. The LS6 454 engine is often cited as the most powerful factory-rated engine of the muscle car era. But what makes it fascinating is that many historians believe its official 450 horsepower rating was intentionally conservative. Insurance companies were already scrutinizing power figures, and General Motors had internal limits on advertised output. Real-world dyno tests and drag strip results suggest the true number was significantly higher. This quiet dishonesty only added to the Chevelle's legend. It wasn't just fast, it was secretly faster than advertised, like a wolf pretending to be a workhorse. The Mustang Mach 1 tells a very different story. Unlike the Chevelle, which gained its reputation through brute force, the Mach 1 was born out of image management. By the late 1960s, the Mustang had become wildly popular, but that popularity came at a cost. Rentals, base six-cylinder versions, and secretary-driven convertibles diluted the Mustang's performance image. Ford needed to remind the world that the Mustang still had teeth. The Mach 1 package was carefully designed to do exactly that. It wasn't just about engines, it was about perception. The blacked-out hood wasn't merely cosmetic, it reduced glare at speed. The hood pins, often dismissed as styling theater, were a direct reference to racing practice. Even the interior, with its high back seats and deep-set gauges, was designed to make the driver feel like they were piloting something serious. An interesting detail often overlooked is that the Mach 1 effectively replaced the GT package in 1969. Ford realized that buyers responded more strongly to a cohesive performance identity than to a collection of optional upgrades. The Mach 1 became a brand within a brand, and it worked. In fact, Mach 1 sales quickly surpassed those of the GT, proving that emotional storytelling could be just as powerful as raw specifications. Another lesser-known fact is that despite its performance image, many Mach 1s were ordered with automatic transmissions. This wasn't a contradiction, it reflected the reality of American performance culture at the time, where straight-line speed and effortless torque mattered as much as driver involvement. The Dodge Charger RT occupied yet another philosophical space. If the Chevelle was a street brawler and the Mustang a sharpened athlete, the Charger was a force of nature. Its design alone set it apart. The 1968 redesign transformed the Charger from a relatively awkward fastback into one of the most dramatic shapes ever put on American roads. The hidden headlights were not just a gimmick, they were a statement. When closed, the front end looked clean and almost sinister, as if the car were deliberately hiding its intentions. When opened, the Charger seemed to snarl. This duality made it unforgettable. One fascinating aspect of the Charger RT is how it balanced luxury and brutality. It was entirely possible to order a Charger with a Hemi engine and at the same time, a plush interior loaded with comfort features. This reflected Dodge's understanding of its audience, buyers who wanted to feel powerful without sacrificing presence or comfort. The Charger was also heavier than both the Chevelle and the Mustang, which affected its handling, but that weight contributed to its aura. On the highway, the Charger felt unshakable, like a rolling monument to excess. It's no coincidence that the Charger became a favorite for film and television. Its size and lines simply read better on camera. Market conditions played a crucial role in shaping all three cars. Fuel was cheap, emissions regulations were minimal, and safety standards were far less restrictive than they would become just a few years later. This allowed engineers to prioritize performance with little concern for long-term consequences. Buyers, for their part, were remarkably knowledgeable. They understood compression ratios, carburetor sizes, and rear axle codes. Dealerships became places of negotiation, not just over price, but over quarter-mile potential. There are countless anecdotes of buyers ordering cars with the explicit intention of racing them on Friday nights and driving them to work on Monday mornings. Competition among manufacturers was fierce and often reactionary. When one brand introduced a more powerful engine, rivals rushed to respond. This escalation explains why the period from roughly 1968 to 1970 feels so intense in hindsight. Power outputs jumped dramatically in a very short time, and each of these cars represents a peak achieved just before external forces intervened. Insurance companies began penalizing high-horsepower models, emissions regulations tightened, and public attitudes toward fuel consumption started to shift. None of this was fully anticipated by buyers at the time, which is why these cars feel so unapologetic today. Design aging is another area where these cars diverge in interesting ways. The Charger's styling has arguably aged the best, often described as timeless or even cinematic. The Mustang Mach 1 feels quintessentially classic, instantly associated with freedom and American youth culture. The Chevelle SS, meanwhile, has gained appreciation over time for its honesty. Where it may have once seemed plain compared to flashier rivals, it is now celebrated for its clean lines and muscular restraint. Modern enthusiasts often view it as the purest expression of what a muscle car should be. Inside, all three cars reflect the priorities of their era. Ergonomics were improving, but still secondary to visual impact. Gauges were large and legible, dashboards bold rather than subtle. Interestingly, despite their performance focus, none of these interiors were truly Spartan. Even the most aggressive versions still offered a level of comfort that made daily use plausible. This duality, savage performance paired with everyday usability, is a large part of their enduring appeal. Driving them today reveals just how different modern expectations have become. By contemporary standards, their brakes feel underpowered, their chassis flex is noticeable, and their steering requires constant attention. Yet these very imperfections create an experience modern cars struggle to replicate. The sensation of managing a powerful machine that demands respect is central to the muscle car mythos. In this regard, each car teaches a slightly different lesson. The Chevelle teaches restraint, the Charger teaches anticipation, and the Mustang teaches precision. Reliability stories from the era are equally revealing. These cars were mechanically simple, which made them easy to repair, but also easy to abuse. Many were driven hard, modified poorly, and maintained inconsistently. As a result, truly original examples are rare today. Matching numbers cars command enormous premiums, not just because of scarcity, but because they serve as historical documents. Physical proof of how these machines were originally conceived. When emissions laws and fuel crises finally caught up with the industry in the early 1970s, the transformation was swift and unforgiving. Compression ratios dropped, horsepower plummeted, and the very idea of effortless excess began to feel outdated. The muscle car didn't die overnight, but its golden age ended decisively. That abrupt conclusion is part of what gives the 1966 1970 period such mythic weight. It feels like a perfect storm that could never be repeated. So, when the question is asked, which of these is the ultimate muscle car? The answer remains deeply personal. The Chevelle SS represents efficiency and quiet menace, a car that speaks softly and hits brutally hard. The Dodge Charger RT embodies spectacle and authority, a machine that commands attention before it even moves. The Mustang Mach 1 delivers engagement and identity, making the driver feel like an active participant rather than a passenger to raw power. Each is a different interpretation of the same dream. More than half a century later, these cars are no longer just vehicles. They are symbols of a moment when ambition outpaced regulation, when style mattered as much as speed, and when the road felt like a proving ground. Perhaps that is why the debate still matters. In choosing between them, we are not just picking a car, we are choosing which version of the muscle car myth speaks most clearly to us.